All right, welcome to the Blue Collar Breakdown. I'm Tom Eddlem, the Blue Collar Economist. Tonight, we're going to talk about the big, beautiful bill. It's the best bill ever. All the other bills were total disasters. This one's going to solve all of America's problems. All right, this is the big, beautiful bill. And it's typical Washington. It is one of those pass or shut down the government type of omnibus bills. I'll get more into that a little bit later, but let's talk first about the contents. Let me get you the contents of the bill. The main thing it does is it extends Trump's 2017 tax cuts another 3 years. So basically until he's out of office, and then the tax increase resets. So it's one of those, when I'm president, you're going to get a tax cut, but I'm going to make sure you get a big tax increase for when I'm no longer here, unless they do something different. I mean, why not make it permanent? If it's a good idea, which it is, lower taxes are always a good idea. Why not make it permanent? Well, there's a good reason for it, and it's not a good reason that's good to you, okay? It's about gaming the budgetary system. You see, it just looks better to all the deficit monitors if you only do it for 3 years, because what they do is they project it out 10 years. So if you're only losing the revenues for 7 years and you count the revenue for if you're only losing the revenue for 3 years and you project it out 10 years, then you've got 7 years of a tax increase that you can account for as deficit reduction. Okay, but that's not going to happen, just like it didn't happen this last time. I mean, in every case, they've extended Trump's tax cuts, and they're most likely to do so anyway, even if this bill fails. Okay, so what else is in it? The no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. There's some good provisions in there, but all of it is funded by deficit spending. Okay, all of it is funded by deficit spending. So then the question is, well, which is better? Which is better? Is it better to not pay now or put it on the national credit card and make your kids and grandkids pay it? That's what it is. And I've been of the habit of saying that the most regressive tax is inflation, because the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be a social creditor. Inflation taxes people who are owed cash assets. Think, for example, wage earners. What does a wage earner do? He works and credits his employer with his wages until payday. Renters, the first thing landlord says is first, last, and security deposit. So he gives the tenant gives the landlord assets that he's owed. He lends them to him, and this is why inflation is so regressive. Even the poorest man has one asset. He has his labor, and that is what's taxed with inflation. So that's why inflation is the most regressive tax, except one, and that's debt. Because the national debt is imposed on people who don't even have their own labor yet. It's imposed on 2-year-old children, 3-year-old children. That's who it's imposed upon. So it's in that sense, it's worse. And of course, we're heading toward a sovereign debt crisis. Okay, so anyway, that's my lecture about which is better, the deficit, the tax cut, and a deficit, or no tax cut and a smaller deficit. But even if we didn't extend Trump's tax cuts, we're still going to have a deficit. We're still going to have the status quo as it exists right now, without extending Trump's tax cut another 3 years, is that we have $1.9 trillion deficits for the $1.8 to $1.9 trillion deficits every year for the rest of Trump's presidency. The big, beautiful bill increases that to about $2.4 trillion, $2.3 to $2.4 trillion every year, adding that to the national debt, which is currently about $37 trillion. Of course, that matters because the United States' credit rating is going down, not just with the credit rating agencies. I mean, last month, the what was it? S&P had lowered our credit rating back in 2015, and the other credit ratings agent and the other credit rating, Fitch, lowered it in 2023. Well, finally, Moody's went along and said, nope, America's not AAA. It's only AA plus, which is a really good credit rating. Okay, if you as an individual have AA plus, you're going to be able to, people will invest with you, because they're basically the credit ratings go this way. It's AAA and then AA, and then there's a plus and a minus in between, and then single A, and then BBB. And that BBB is the last of what they call investment grade ratings. So these are companies that are still pretty solid. I mean, it includes, some insurance companies and smaller ones, but, companies that have solid investments that are not considered exceptionally risky. But once you get below BBB, you get to BB or B, and then there's also a C. Then you're dealing with what's called junk bonds, and these are considered exceptionally risky. Well, Standard & Poor's has this online ratings where they sort of judge the US dollar they have like a secondary rating system where they go into the credit default swaps market and find out how much is the US dollar and the, I should say, not the US dollar, the federal debt, how much is it really being rated by actual investors? Because Moody's and Fitch and Standard & Poor's, they don't actually do the investments. They just rate the investment product. And what they found was that the US debt instruments had gone from AA to BBB, so BBB plus. So it's actually 3 steps above junk bond, but it's half a dozen steps lower than the official ratings. They've gone that far down in the actual markets. So that's pretty dangerous. And when you're adding in 1.9 now $2.4 trillion every year, you run the risk of serious downgrades and in a Greek-style debt crisis. Not this year. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but you do run that risk. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the budget tricks, because this is key to how it runs in Washington, including under Trump, but also before under Biden, before that under Trump 1, before that under Obama, really going back to it. Like if you're like me, I'm Gen X, early Gen X, or I was born in 1965, so I'll be 60 this year. If you're like me, you grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and you watched Saturday morning cartoons, and Schoolhouse Rock came on, and there's this "I'm Just a Bill" segment in the commercials, and it was kind of catchy, I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and it described the legislative process for how government spends money. It basically says, oh, well, Congressman gets an idea, what the heck is that big hand in the road? How do we get rid of it? And then the congressman introduces a bill, and then it goes to committee, and then the House votes on it, and then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate does the committee, and then they vote on it, and it goes to the president, and the president can veto it and all the rest. That's not how budgeting is done in Washington. Now, traditionally, at that time, this was released, I'm Just a Bill, I think was released in 1976. It was kind of done that way. In fact, all federal spending from the early 70s on to, I think there was a big law passed in 1974. I think it was called the Budget Control Act of 1974. I think it was 74. There were a couple of budget control acts in the 70s, but basically the plan was to do this. First, they come up with an overall budgetary plan. Like, here's how much we're going to spend. And this is not going to become a law This is Congress, the House and the Senate deciding between themselves how much are they going to spend this year total and in what general categories. All right. And the budget reconciliation bill, it's called. It was usually like a HJ-Res or SJ-Res. It's a joint resolution. So it doesn't go to the president, but all the congressmen, it goes to the House floor for a vote, and it goes to the Senate floor for a vote. And it's drawn up by the budget committees of both the House and the Senate, and they vote on it. And they vote, gee, this is what we want our deficit to be, or our surplus. This is what we want to spend on the military. These are guidelines. These are maximums for the various committees. All right. And then once that's passed, then so Congress has already voted on a general budget, but then they break it up into 12 different parts times 2. Okay. So basically what they do is they pass what are called appropriations bills and authorization bills. I know this sounds really complex, but think of it as the authorization bills are this coffee mug. All right. It's going to have this shape. This is how much the authorization bills are the ones that change the laws that the money for the program is going to be poured into. The coffee is going to be done. The coffee inside here are appropriations bills. These are the money bills, the money bills. All right. So together, the cup and the coffee make up the program, and the Congress is going to vote on the cup, and they're going to vote on the liquid coffee separately. The cup is going to be the authorization program, which changes the rules of, let's say, how many jet fighters the Defense Department is going to buy. And the appropriation bill is going to say, here's the money for it. We're going to just dump the money into the cup. Okay. So in the 1970s, Congress voted on all federal spending 3 times, right? They voted for an overall budget. Then they broke it up into 12 different parts. So they had really 24 more bills where they would vote on all the money in the budget twice again. All right. Once for the cup, for the authorization, once for the appropriation for each of the 12 departments. So there'll be one for the Defense Department, one for Health and Human Services, one for Agriculture, one for the State Department and the courts and foreign aid, one for Commerce, there were 12 different ones. Occasionally there were 13, but for the most part, it was 12 different regular appropriations and authorizations bills. And Congress in the 70s, most of the time did that. They passed all 12 authorization and appropriations bills, and they became law. And sometimes the appropriations were cut in the sense that, they had the big budget bill, and then they pass a little bit less than that, but the budget was sort of the maximum that they could spend. So a lot of times they would say, look, we are authorizing $15 billion for foreign aid. And they would say, we're going to do 14.3. All right, that's what they would do. They haven't passed the regular 12 authorization bills or appropriation bills since 1996. And the way they do budgeting in Congress now is they pass what's called an omnibus. Omni means everything, right? So it's an everything bill. It's the whole budget or a very large part of it. In this case, that's basically what the big beautiful bill is. It's got the tax policy in there, it's got the spending in there, and the deficit planning, and it's the budget. It's got the old budget bill in there, and that's what they do every year. So this is not a Trump only thing. It was done under Biden, and one of the things that Speaker Mike Johnson promised when he became Speaker 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago? It was, or a year and a half ago. It wasn't that long ago. He said, we're going to do the regular 12 bills. And then the first thing he did was say, we're going to do one omnibus bill so we can get to the 12 bills next year. And here we are again. still doing the 12 bill, doing the omnibus. And a lot of congressmen, not a lot of congressmen, a couple of congressmen are sick of it, including Congressman Thomas Massey, who had an epic rant back in September of last year about how all of these things are all budgetary tricks. This is all, they throw a little dangle like the tips or whatever into the bill so that they can get all the Republicans to vote for it and all the Democrats to vote against it, because it has some perfunctory cut, even though there's not really any spending cuts in the bill. If you read the Congressional Budget Office analysis of the bill, the spending cuts never total more than $100 billion in any particular year during Trump's presidency. It actually increases in 2025 and 2026, and just a couple billion. And it's just, I think it's, 68 billion or 69 billion in 2028. It's just, these are token compared to 7 trillion. So that's less than 0.1% of federal spending that is being cut from the projections of what they're going to spend. So, but what they do is they have these budget tricks, and the big, beautiful bill is just like that, in the sense that all of the tax cuts are all up front. They're all, we get Trump's tax cuts extended until 2018 with the first for the next 3 years. And almost all of the spending cuts are postponed 3+ years. Well, why is that? Why are all the big spending cuts 4 years out? Well, because it's easy to cut in the future because nobody actually sees any pain. It's easy to cut in the future because we could just wait for the Democrats to get elected and undo the spending cuts, because that's what's going to happen. The Democrats will be elected and they'll say, oh, all these cuts that were going to happen, we're not going to do that. Because we have two parties, the party of tax and spend, the Democrats, and the party of borrow and spend, the Republicans. The Republicans want to keep spending just like the Democrats want to keep spending. They have slightly different spending priorities, but they both want to keep spending. But the Republicans don't want to tax. So they'd rather borrow. And this is what Trump is doing. And this is historically what has happened. The last time there was a serious effort to have a balanced budget was back in the 1990s with Graham, Leach, Bliley. I mean, it kept adding names, by the time it finished adding names, they didn't even really bother trying anymore. I mean, we were sort of lucky in the sense that we had a fairly robust economy in the 1990s. So as long as they kept spending at a rough parity to what it had been, and there was this huge tax revolt back in the mid 90s. 1994 was the big year when Newt Gingrich became Speaker of the House, and there was a big brouhaha a showdown between Clinton and Gingrich was the one who blinked, not Clinton. The spending kept going, but it didn't increase all that much. In fact, I think 1995, 1996 were the only years that spending did not increase more than the rate of inflation in my lifetime, except 2021, because that was the year after the CARES Act, which was a huge giant jump in spending during 2020. But other than that, the spending has always increased more than inflation. And that will continue today. So going forward, here's how bad it's getting. Congress also has two kinds of spending that they do. They have what's called mandatory spending, and they have discretionary spending. And then there's interest on the debt, which they account separately from mandatory, but we're going to put that in the mandatory category for the purposes of this podcast. And mandatory spending are those kind of programs that are set up in perpetuity to be spent automatically, regardless of whether Congress votes to spend the money. These are programs like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, farm subsidies, student loans. That's most of it right there. There's probably a few others, but these are programs that are automatically built into the law. Their funding is automatically granted in perpetuity, even if the demographics go berserk, which Social Security and Medicare are, because we're an aging population. And basically what's happened is the rest of the spending, which is what they call discretionary spending, is the defense spending, foreign aid, some business programs, the courts, the FBI, most of the office buildings for the non-mandatory programs. So, I mean, I think the defense, veterans benefits would be part of mandatory, but none of the defense spending, official defense spending, is mandatory. In fact, the U.S. Constitution says Congress may not appropriate funds from the military for more than 2 years. So, constitutionally speaking, Congress could put everything on autopilot, like they've done with Social Security and Medicare, spending-wise, except the defense spending. In fact, they're probably violating the Constitution by putting veterans benefits into the mandatory part, because what person signing up for the military doesn't already come to expect veterans benefits when they get out, or if they're injured or whatever. So I mean, that I would think that should be appropriated at least every 2 years, and probably every year. But that's not how they do it. But I go into this long explanation of mandatory versus discretionary spending because 2025 is the first year where mandatory spending and interest on the debt exceeds all federal taxes. Okay, so what that means is, before Congress even met on January 4th or 5th or whatever, after they got elected, the federal government was already in deficit. Before they spent a penny on the national defense, before they paid the Supreme Court justices, or any other courts, before they paid for immigration control, before they paid for our embassies abroad, before they paid any foreign aid, before they paid for the FBI, or the U.S. Marshals, before they paid for hundreds and hundreds of federal programs, the discretionary spending is $1.8 trillion in 2025. Before they paid for any of that, we were already in deficit, because all of the discretionary spending, the money that Congress appropriates anew every year, is already deficit, because we have a $1.9 trillion deficit. So that's how badly out of whack our budgeting system is right now in America, that even if they don't vote to spend anything, even if they don't meet, our national debt goes up. And of course they do meet, and they spend another 1.8 trillion. And, they say, oh, and let's cut the revenue. And this is why we're in the situation that we're in. And it includes, there should be some very easy cuts. I mean, Social Security and Medicare, admittedly, they're political touchstones, but they've got to be dealt with eventually, because the demographics they're going off a cliff financially. I mean, the longer people live, the longer they're going to be on Medicare, the longer they're going to collect Social Security, and people are living longer, but they're not working longer. I mean, you're going to have the people who are working from 18 or 20 or 22 or whatever, all the way up till 65, and then they're going to start collecting. So if you have a person working 40 years or 45 years, and then you have a person collecting originally Social Security, the average Social Security recipient only collected 4 years. Now it's 11 or 12, and it's only going to get longer as people live longer, as health is better. Our obesity crisis is actually one of those crises that is making Social Security and Medicare more solvent. I know it sounds ridiculous that obesity is making Medicare more solvent, but it's true because they're not living long enough to have as many ailments and collect as many payments. I mean, it's almost like, if they wanted to balance the budget, they should get everybody to start smoking cigarettes again, because as long as people live longer, Social Security is getting to be a worse and worse deal. But there should be some easy cuts that they could cut a couple hundred billion at least out. I mean, when the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, came around, they said, we're going to cut $2 trillion. I was like, you're not going to cut $2 trillion unless you really go into the mandatory programs, unless you go into Social Security and Medicare. And there's probably even some fat without trimming the programs you could cut there. I know DOGE was looking at some of the contracts that they had with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, where they were basically renting out empty warehouses and facilities in case something happened. And it's just, why are you doing that if nothing is happening? It seems to be a waste of money. They could always rent it when something happens. But take, for example, foreign aid. That's an easy one, right? That should be the easiest one. We're borrowing money on children and grandchildren so that we can give it away to foreign countries. And most of the time, that foreign aid is regime change. It creates instability. It encourages socialism abroad. It encourages, even aid to Israel is. People have done studies and shown that it encourages more socialism and dependency in Israel and more harm than it does in the form of benefits. I know, with Israel, they went from 3 billion to 5 billion recently. And you look at, like, there's only 10 million people in the country, or maybe 12. That's a lot per person, but it's not quite. What's the number? It's over 500, less than 1,000, but per person, and that's every year. But if it creates dependency, if it is used to encourage, a lot of it's used to encourage militarism, but the economic package that we used to give them previously encouraged socialism, and the thing like the collective farms that they used to have, and that it was just a waste of money. And we're borrowing money to do that. That should be easy. There are all kinds of other programs too. There's all kinds of corporate subsidies in there. And I'm not even talking about NASA and all the contracts for NASA and the FDA. Of course, the Defense Department has all kinds of contracts with big pharma that are in the billions. I mean, Moderna and Pfizer both have billions of dollars worth of contracts with the Pentagon for providing all kinds of services. But I mean, like, even something, the Department of Agriculture has a program called the Market Access Program. Okay. And what this is it creates, it is literally a $1 billion program that creates lobbies. It creates commodity lobbies. Like, there's a national popcorn board. If you go to popcorn I don't know if it's gov or org or com, but it's run by the government. It's run by your taxes. And the promoting popcorn is, who knew tasting good could be so healthy? I'm like, popcorn is not healthy. It's empty calories. I mean, the Aboriginal American Indians used to grind their corn with charcoal so they could get some nutrients into the corn, so they wouldn't suffer through the winter. There are literally no, I'm not going to say no, but there are among even the grains, which are typically low in vitamins compared to fruits and vegetables, that it's lower. It's the lowest of the grains as far as nutritional value. Corn is. So to say, oh, it's healthy, that's what the government is, that's where your taxes are going. And it's $1 billion. There's a national honey board. There's a national pork farmers, and everything. It's just you go to the website for the Market Access Program, and it's it's $1 billion that's wasted every year. $1 billion. And that should be an easy cut. I mean, admittedly, they're not all that easy. I mean, like the Pentagon should be easy. You know, that we could probably cut 500 billion from the Pentagon this year and not in any way endanger our national security, because we're currently spending 800 billion. Trump wants to increase it to $1 trillion. But the next biggest spender militarily is China at 300 billion. Well, if we spend 500 billion, we should be able to defend ourselves from China. I mean, we have the advantage of geography. We have the advantage of technology. We already have the equipment already made. I mean, where is our disadvantage? We should be able to cut the Defense Department in half without, because it wouldn't cut veterans benefits because that's separate. You know, the veterans benefits are another 200 billion, by the way. Okay. So it's not going to cut veterans benefits, but we should be able to cut, you know, all of these military bases abroad. There's all kinds of things that we could cut. But we don't want to do that because the military industrial complex is against that. All right. Where am I? I think I'm good for time here. Yeah, I wanted to go 30 minutes. I've gone 31. Okay. So to sum up, big, beautiful bill, I hope it goes down. And Thomas Massie, the most libertarian member of Congress, also hopes it goes down. So does Rand Paul. Donald Trump is so mad that Thomas Massie is not going to vote for it that he's a vindictive little bitch, isn't he? He's put together a $1 million ad buy to try to primary Massie. You know, think about that for a second. The one guy who wants to balance the budget and cut spending, who has bills in Congress to extend the Trump tax cuts, to end taxes on tips, to end taxes on overtime, to abolish the Fed. The one guy who has all of those bills, and no one else does, that's the one Trump wants to primary. That's the one he wants to primary. You know, Trump likes to say, I'm a big fiscal hawk. There's no fiscal hawk like me. And I like to say, there is no fiscal hawk like you, because if it's like you, you're not a fiscal hawk at all. I mean, you're campaigning to increase the deficit by $450 to $500 billion a year, every year. You know, we've got $37 trillion, and you're going to add $10 trillion on just during this term. That's what Trump is going to do. He's going to add almost $10 trillion onto the national debt just during this most recent 4-year term. He's going to break his own record of adding debt to the federal government in one term, because, you know, 2017 to 2021 was his first term, and he broke the record then. He's going to break it again. You know, I mean, Trump is go big or go home. All right. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, be sure to buy me a coffee, because I will add to this podcast as my support grows. And thank you very much.